I learned to design my first piece of clothing all because I wanted to meet my celebrity crush, James Marsters. I have met him once before, so this would technically be a second meeting that I know will happen someday. And I am so prepared for when it does because I decided to make the cutest bolero coat. I knew it would work with my body type, which is soft gamine, according to the Kibe body system. If you're not familiar with that, it can be helpful to figure out what kinds of clothing goes with your particular body type. I knew from the get-go I wanted to make a bolero coat, and this was my first foray into design. Hello, I'm Christine. I am a sewist and I am a card maker, and I am usually doing both. This is part 2 of my all sewing series, and in my first video I talked a little bit about sewing basics, reviewing my first year of sewing and what I've learned. And this is the part of the series where I focus on having actual humans walk you through the process. Super helpful. I'm gonna back up and give you a bit of context. I basically rewatched all of Buffy a couple of years ago, and I loved the show to begin with, but the second time around, I got really into the character of Spike, and I thought nothing would make me happier than to meet this man in person. Is it possible? Lo and behold, it was possible. I took myself to Hellmouth Con in Los Angeles. I'd never been to a con of any kind, and I'm not a super fan, I would say, of Buffy, now that I know what a real super fan is. I am a super Buffy fan, but not a super fan, if that makes sense. Anyway, I took myself to Hellmouth Con, planned to meet him. I made him this extremely elaborate card that took literally months to make. I'll link it below. I have an Instagram video about that card. I presented it to him at the event, and there were sparks. I mean, this is my perspective, but I handed him the card. He took his gracious time with everyone, such a lovely man, but I'm telling you, there were sparks, and there's gonna be another meet and greet, and I'm gonna wear my jacket. A huge reason I felt ready to make this coat was I had practiced on several ready-to-wear pieces. I'd been following YouTube videos, I'd gotten comfortable with my machine, I felt pretty confident that I could level up, and I discovered we had a local sewing school in my area that had a 3-part series class structure for aspiring designers. And they took you from learning to sketch a design in your head and be specific about it on paper, and then doing a mock-up series of classes. And then the final part of the series was making the actual piece. So I really lucked out because this sewing school has people who have worked for Vogue and for Harper's and for Marvel. Basically extremely accomplished sewists. One of them, I think, is like she has a title of some kind, like Queen? Maybe she's Queen Jennifer of the sewing room in Alameda. So I came to the first part of the series with a design already partially in mind. I knew I wanted to make a bolero coat because that is a coat that just works well with my body type. eBay, I'm telling you, research it. And I had done some research on Pinterest with mood boards, which is a great way to get clear about what kind of outfit you want in the end. If you pull different outfits on Pinterest and start just pinning like silhouettes and details and closures that you like, that helps you narrow down on a specific idea. In this first part of the series, they gave us worksheets to work on that had all kinds of specific details to note down, like what sorts of fabric you might want for this silhouette, what kinds of closures, what sorts of details, whether you want top stitching, where does that top stitching go? Just very, very clear-eyed way to get all of the dreams in your head into a paper-based reality. And then once you have those on a paper-based reality, someone who sews can look at it and say, aha, yes, we can do this and we can do this. We maybe don't want to do that, etc., etc. This did mean I had to learn how to draw the item of clothing that I wanted, and I guess they used to use these things called shadow boxes, where you draw one half of the silhouette that you're interested in and the details, and then you fold it like you trace out the other half, so you have really symmetrical looking sketches. I don't know if they still do this. They said it was the old school way. It was really a cool piece of antique technology, but it helped me get a symmetrical silhouette for sure. And this was the part of the class where I really honed in on the details that I wanted, right down to like the exact shape of the ruffled pleat that I had imagined all around the bolero coat. I really wanted a Victorian steampunk vibe, even though that's not necessarily my normal style. I think James Marsters would like it, don't you think so? Before the second series of classes, where we learned to build a muslin or a mock-up, a toile, a practice garment of our eventual design, before I even started that series, I thought I'd get ahead of the game and ask ChatGPT to see if it could help me with my muslin, and it could not, is the short end of the story. You can learn to do a box pleat on ChatGPT, it's true, but trying to get it to the specifications of a bolero jacket in the shape you want it and the exact length, just take yourself to a human being. The second lesson I learned was measure yourself honestly and go by those measurements, because the sizing on patterns does not map to the sizing that we currently see in stores, where everyone's like an ideal double negative or something. We're like negative humans now. -2. But do not try and lie to yourself about the numbers. They are just numbers, and they will help you end up with a product that matches your body. When I did start this second series, we first focused on finding a base pattern that matched our intent. So I wanted a bolero jacket with a bunch of details, and my sewing teacher helped me find a Vogue pattern from, I think, the 90s that matched the general silhouette I was going for. And we worked on modifying that base pattern to fit the specs of my design worksheet that I had developed in the first series. One of the major changes I wanted to make was to have these kind of puff sleeves, and that was a cool technique to learn because the base pattern had very tight fitting sleeves, and so we basically did a slash and I was gonna call it, not slash and burn, that's for forests. Slash and spread. We did a slash and spread technique for the sleeve cap, where you actually draw straight lines along the sleeve cap, cut into them, spread the pattern, kind of like fan. This is the base pattern. We like draw the lines, and then we cut the lines, and then we spread the pattern, and then we have a new, bigger sleeve cap. I hope that was clear. And once we had that spread out pattern, we traced over a new piece of paper to get a new pattern, and that became the actual pattern of the final piece. The other part of this class that was super specific to my design was this box pleat that I wanted around the collar and all around the entire bolero coat. I found a base pattern that had what was called a knife pleat around the collar, but I wanted a box pleat, which is different than a knife pleat, and it involved math, and I think I blocked out that part, but my teacher showed me how to fold a box pleat, very origami-ish, and I measured it out, did it on my little piece of paper, and then I eventually translated that into my final fabric. This is definitely not something I think I could have learned from a video just because it was so hands-on, and I had to kind of see her folding the box pleat from all angles to actually get it into my body. It's almost like dancing for the fingers. The third part of the class was where we actually built the final garment, and this was where I learned the puff sleeve that I had spent so much time slashing and spreading for my muslin really did not actually work with my final piece of fabric. And in the first video I made, I talked about the importance of matching your practice garment fabric to your final fabric if possible, because different fabrics look different even though they have the same shape. I really did not like the way the sleeve looked on my final fabric when I had done the big puff. I felt like a football player. There's nothing wrong with football players at all. I admire them very much, but that was just not the vibe I wanted for James Marsters. So that was an important lesson learned. Match your muslin as close as possible to the final fabric. I ended up redoing the sleeve, but because I'd already built my foundation around ready-to-wear patterns and I'd already tinkered with this pattern, I felt pretty comfortable just going ahead and trying a similar looking sleeve cap that I already had done on another project and fitting it into this one. Once you start branching out into designing your own pieces or just going outside of the base pattern that you start working with, you get a lot more comfortable mixing and matching different patterns. Anyway, I found a good sleeve cap for this one and I was happy with it. It was actually closer to the original pattern. The other thing I realized for this particular fabric, it was a mid-weight denim, was that for the ruffle on the muslin, when you fold it over the fabric, it was still fairly light and the ruffle was fairly sharp, and I liked that about the muslin. But I realized folding over a mid-weight denim, the ruffle itself would get kind of bulky. I decided to use a lightweight silk organza as one side of the ruffle and just the mid-weight denim for the other side of the ruffle. I had my denim on one side, my silk organza on the other side, and I had to stitch a line down both of them. I was supposed to fold it on the line of stitching so that it would look really crisp. Instead, what I did, rather than folding on the stitch line, I ended up wrapping the silk organza around to sit on top of the denim so that one side was silk organza and the other side, when you flipped it over, was denim, but also this very fine line of silk organza detail. It's true the raw edge of the denim was in there. It was caught in there, but you really can't see it unless you're trying really hard to find it. And it became a design feature that I really liked about the final coat. I bought my fabric for the final product at a super fancy, high-end, chic fabric store in San Francisco called Britex, and that store is like the land of Oz. It has the most beautiful fabrics that are not necessarily cheap. They pay rent in Union Square after all. And I was fairly intimidated to go in there because this is where the fancy people shop, and I don't necessarily consider myself a fancy person. But because I came with my original sketch from the first class I took and I'd already made a practice garment, I felt more prepared going in there than I otherwise would have. When I showed the sales lady the sketch of what I was working on, she seemed really relieved because she knew exactly what I needed. She walked me straight to the section upstairs with all of the denim, pulled out the most beautiful fabric, and she was like, "Yes, this is your winner." And I said, "Great," is what I said. I don't know if there was another winner in the store, but I love what she picked out. By the end of the series, this jacket came out even better, I think, than I originally expected. It just seemed totally me when I put it on, and I felt so proud of having taken an idea in my head, putting it on paper, getting all of the bits and bobs exactly the way I wanted them, and a final product that mapped to my body perfectly because I didn't lie about my measurements. And the whole thing was just a dream. It went as good as it could have possibly gone, and it's because I learned from other human beings and I took my time. It was a slow process. The whole thing took like 2 months to build, and I put a lot of thought into it. Now, the plan was to go to Hellmouth Con once again this past June to meet James Marsters and get a marriage proposal, but he did not end up going this year. So I've not yet gotten to meet him wearing my jacket, but I am ready for the next time. James Marsters, if you're watching this, I'm ready. And I also have a pair of pants that I later designed to go with the jacket, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about those in my next video, the third in the series, and that will focus on adaptive sewing because I have special parts that I need accounted for. So stay tuned. Thank you so much for watching, and if you would be so kind as to leave me a like or even consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video, I would so appreciate it, and hit the bell notification just so you stay up to date when I create a new video. All right, everyone, happy sewing, and I'll see you next time. Bye.